All right, so you know how everyone always talks about ice in their drinks, right?
Right.
Well, today we're talking about ice, but like on a completely different scale. We're going all the way to the Himalayas to explore their ancient glaciers.
Fascinating stuff, really.
These glaciers are more than just scenic mountaintops. They're massive reservoirs of frozen water built up over millennia. And get this, that water feeds rivers that support a huge population.
Absolutely.
We might even be talking about the source of your water, and the thing is, they're melting, like way faster than they should be.
Yes. That's the alarming part. It really raises some serious questions for all of us. This deep dive, we're going to try to understand why Himalayan glacier melt matters to you.
Perfect. Let's get into it. We're talking about over 9,500 glaciers just in India.
Wow. That many.
Yeah, most of them are concentrated in Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir, over 5,200 in those regions alone. Then you have Arunachal Pradesh, which has the fewest at about 160. But here's the kicker. All of them, every single one, is shrinking. And it's not just in India, it's a trend across the whole Himalayan range.
It really is. And what's concerning is that it's not a slow, gradual process for many of them. It's happening rapidly at an accelerated pace.
So not like an ice cube melting in your hand, but more like dropping that ice cube into a hot drink.
Yeah, exactly. The speed at which they're losing ice has increased significantly in recent years. That's why this is such a big deal.
It throws everything out of whack. The natural water supply balance gets totally messed up and, well, it introduces a lot of instability.
Definitely. A lot of instability.
For example, take the Gangotri Glacier. It's the source of the Ganga River. And the Ganga, well, it's a lifeline for millions upon millions of people.
Sacred to many as well.
Exactly, a sacred river. So historically, Gangotri was retreating at a rate of about 18.8 meters per year. That was between 1935 and 1996.
Okay.
Already quite a lot.
Yeah, that's a significant distance.
But then by 2022, it was almost double that, at 34 meters per year.
Wow.
It's like the glacier just hit the gas pedal all of a sudden. That kind of jump isn't just a slightly bigger number. It's like the glacier suddenly shifted gears.
It seems to be a change in how the glacier is reacting to climate change.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is that near doubling of the retreat rate we see in Gangotri, it's not unique.
Right.
We're seeing it in other Himalayan glaciers too, like Phadopanth, another one feeding the Ganga. It's retreating rapidly. Then you have the Dakrayani Glacier in the Bhagirathi Basin. It's been shrinking by 15 to 20 meters every year since 1995.
That's a pretty consistent loss.
It is. And then there's Chorabari up in the Alaknanda Basin. This one really hits home because it's connected to those terrible Kedarnath floods from a few years back.
Oh, right.
Between 2003 and 2016, it was losing about 9 to 11 meters of ice each year. These aren't just numbers on a page, you know. It represents a huge loss of ice, and in the case of Chorabari, it shows us what can happen downstream.
Exactly.
The melting of that glacier contributed to the instability that caused those devastating floods.
And this ties into another major risk that comes with rapid glacier melt, which is glacial lake outburst floods.
GLOFs.
Yes, geovos. When glaciers melt back, they often leave depressions that fill with meltwater, forming lakes. The problem is these lakes can be dammed by ice that isn't stable, or loose rock and debris, and if that natural dam breaks, well, it unleashes a massive surge of water and sediment downstream. It can be unbelievably destructive.
So initially when you hear about glaciers melting, you might think, oh, well, more water flowing into the rivers, right? But it's not that simple.
No, not at all. You're right. In the short term, you do see higher water levels because of the increased melt. It's like a temporary boost. But it's not sustainable. Imagine glaciers as a savings account of water. When they melt faster, you get a sudden influx of cash, but you're depleting your savings at an alarming rate. Eventually, as the glaciers shrink and lose mass, the amount of meltwater feeding the rivers drops dramatically. Rivers like the Ganga, Brahmaputra, and Indus could face a long-term decrease in flow.
And those rivers support hundreds of millions of people.
Hundreds of millions, yes. It affects everything from drinking water to irrigation, sanitation, and just overall water security.
That's kind of terrifying to think about when you consider just how many people depend on those rivers. It's not just a local problem either. It has the potential to create water crises and everything that comes with that across a massive area.
Absolutely, it's a huge issue. And then there are those geolofts we talked about.
Right, geolofts.
The 2021 disaster in Uttarakhand where that Tapovan hydroelectric station was destroyed, remember? Nearly 150 people lost their lives. That's just one example of how destructive these events can be. It really shows the danger of the instability caused by these rapidly melting glaciers. More meltwater, more unstable glacial lakes, it's making the whole region much more hazardous.
I can't even imagine the force of one of those floods. Just a wall of water and debris crashing down a valley.
It's incredible, isn't it? It starts as a tranquil high-altitude lake, and then suddenly unleashes that kind of devastation.
And it all goes back to the interconnectedness of these natural systems.
Exactly. Climate change drives the glacial melt, which then creates the unstable conditions that form these dangerous lakes, which then have the potential to fail catastrophically. It's all linked. One change just magnifies the others.
And it's not just the threat of water shortages and floods that we need to think about. It seems like there's a cultural and environmental price to pay as well.
Absolutely. For many communities in the Himalayas, glaciers and the rivers they feed aren't just sources of water. They're deeply ingrained in their culture, their spirituality, and their way of life. When these glaciers retreat and sacred lakes and rivers disappear, it's a huge cultural loss.
Yeah.
Just think about the impact on generations who've grown up seeing these natural landmarks as part of their identity, their traditions, only to see them vanish. It's more than just the physical landscape that's changing. It's affecting their whole relationship with the land.
It's like a part of their history, their identity is being erased.
It is. And then there's the impact on the environment. These high-altitude ecosystems are unique and incredibly fragile.
Right.
As the rivers change more unpredictable flow, sudden surges followed by dry periods, and as temperatures rise, the plants and animals that are adapted to these specific conditions struggle to survive. We're looking at potential losses in biodiversity, with these icy landscapes transforming into something much warmer, drier, and less hospitable.
So many consequences stemming from the initial melt. And what about the economic impact?
Oh, there's a significant economic impact as well. Take agriculture, for example. In many of these regions, it relies heavily on consistent meltwater for irrigation, less flow, more unpredictability, and you start seeing crop failures, which directly impacts food security and livelihoods.
Right. Makes sense.
Hydroelectric power projects also become much riskier with GLFs and uncertain water availability, and tourism, which is so vital in some areas, could collapse if the glaciers and those iconic snow-capped peaks disappear. People won't want to visit barren mountains.
It's all interconnected and it's all quite worrying. Is anything being done to address this? Is the world paying attention to what's happening?
Well, there are definitely efforts underway. Governments and research institutions are setting up monitoring stations to track the rate of glacial melt and trying to understand the processes involved. There are a lot of scientific studies trying to model future scenarios and assess the risks.
That's good. At least they're trying to figure things out.
They are. But the scale of this problem is massive, and the main driver, global climate change, needs solutions that go way beyond anything local.
So we're collecting data, trying to understand it all, but it sounds like real, impactful solutions need to be much bigger and more systematic.
Yes, exactly. We need things like global agreements to reduce emissions, big policy changes to encourage sustainability, and a worldwide shift away from fossil fuels. Those are the kinds of actions that will make a real difference. On a local level, we need better water management, early warning systems for GOOFs, and development policies that protect the fragile Himalayan ecosystem. But those are more like band-aids, addressing the symptoms rather than the root cause of the problem.
It sounds like we're running out of time to act.
We are.
When you realize that the source of water for so many millions is vanishing right before our eyes, the urgency of this situation becomes really clear.
You're right, and it's not just a problem for future generations. It's happening now. We're already seeing the effects with these extreme weather events and changing water availability. The Himalayas are sending us a message, showing us what's to come if we don't act.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it makes me think, if those ancient glaciers could talk, what would they tell us? Would they warn us, plead with us to do something?
It's an interesting thought.
We have the knowledge, we understand what's happening. So the question is, are we listening? Are we ready to take real action, the kind of large-scale change that's needed? Or are we just going to watch as a critical part of our planet disappears? These aren't hypothetical consequences for the future. They're happening now and will impact generations to come.
I think that's a question we all need to ask ourselves.